Can you believe it? All right. Welcome back. Most retirement plans they have gaps, but because people think it's well, I don't have enough to save, right? So you're thinking, oh, I got to save more money, but that's actually not what it is. The other people will say, well, maybe it's because I don't have the best investments, right? Or I'm retiring too early. And it's not really that either. I have found that all retirement plans have gaps, they have holes. And it's mostly because no one's ever mentioned to them, no one's ever shared the wisdom that's like, hey, that's where the problems are going to show up when it comes to just retirement in general. And I'm going to go through a handful of those strategies for you today. So hopefully you've been enjoying these weeks. Last week we had our dinner workshop. So that was on Thursday night. That was a good time. And so I wasn't able to be here with you all, but I hope that you're having a great week. And so for this Wealthy Retirement Show, if you've been able to watch the first couple of weeks, then you've seen us go through a handful of strategies where we have 9 different segments where it touches us along the retirement planning journey. And I think that that's important because ultimately we're at different phases. In the way that I went through and I created these 7 stages, and we'll go through them, and then you'll see what strategies are available for you to take at each of these stages. And so we're going to start with our income planning blueprint today, which I normally call the income stacking. And the reason I do that is because I have found that the numbers show that 65% of self-made have at least 3 streams of income. And then I have found that 65% of people live paycheck to paycheck. So that lends itself to see that it's not that having one stream is impossible. It's just that it's less efficient, that it's in our best interest to have money working for us so that at some point along the way, we don't have to work for it. And that's how I define retirement, separating your time from your money. So answering the question, and I get this one and a lot when I have like one-offs and different workshops that I'll do, they'll be like, how much do I actually need to retire? How much money do I actually need? And you and I have probably heard a variety of different numbers along the way, like, hey, how much do you need? And we've probably heard, well, you need 80% of your income. And we'll talk about why people say that, and you can decide whether or not that makes sense. And some people will say, well, no, that doesn't make sense. But I'll share with you why people think that makes sense. And then I will ultimately let you decide, yeah, I'll do it that way. I've want to strive and show you kind of the simplest way to figure it out. But if you just went and Googled it, most likely what you are going to see is someone's going to say, hey, you need 1.7 million for your, in your retirement fund. And most people, when they see that, they're like, well, that's not what's in my retirement fund. Does that mean I can never retire? And no, that's not what that means. Ultimately, what people are saying is if Social Security ends up being on average about $2,100 a month, and then the average person who retires on about 50, 60,000, right? Something like that. Then what they're ultimately saying is if you do 2,100 a month, you multiply that by 12, then you'll end up with about $25,000, right? So you have 25,000 in Social Security. And then they'll say, well, if you need to get up to around that $60,000, that means you need about another $40,000 from your investments. And somewhere along the way, if you go by the 4% rule, then that means that for every $1 million, you will end up with 40K. Right. And so then that's sort of where they get those quick and dirty numbers from. Like, hey, you'll need to be so around there. And then you start accounting for inflation and healthcare costs and different things. I think that there's a handful of ways to get a good feel, but I do think having a better gauge around what the number is for you ends up being the best approach, because I can give you that and you can be like, well, I don't have that. I don't need that much. I live in a different state where the cost of living is high. I'm going to move to a different country where the cost of living is even higher. So how do I know that number works for me? And so that's why I want to give you a more specific example today so that you will be able to say, yeah, that one makes a little bit more sense for me. So when you are making the plan for you and to see what your number is, you almost always will build a cake. So we'll have like 3 layers to the cake, and then you'll be like, all right, I'm good to go. So the first layer is going to be your essentials. So let me go ahead and I will erase some of this so we can see that. There's so many different ways. I've seen someone will say it's 10 times of your income, it's 80% of your salary, that all these numbers are different ways to get an idea. But ultimately, I think you're worth the investment of the time to really sit down and look at your numbers. And so you have 3 layers of the cake. Forgive me for my non-straight lines. Wow. All right. So we're going to start with our bottom layer, and that is going to be our essentials. Now, when I say essentials and I talk to people, the reason I smile is because some people will say that their essentials is things that I'm not 100% sure is the essentials. So let's go ahead and let's start defining it. Of course, housing. You're going to need your utilities to make sure you have your electricity going. You're going to want your food covered in there. And then any sort of medications. So we'll just say meds. And then we'll say transportation. That your essentials, the bare minimum that you need in retirement, really is going to be like my home, my healthcare, my food, and my traveling. That I need to see what my essentials are so that I can start building this. And the thought and the hope is that your essentials is covered by your guaranteed income. Right? So that's the hope. When we talk about the income stacks and the income streams you're going to have, if you have a business, you'll have a profit. And then you'll probably have like capital gains if you sell the business. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about being a business owner and ways to structure a business sale. If you have real estate, then you're going to have rental. And then you'll also have capital gains if you end up selling the property. If you're investing the money, then you're either going to have interest income, you're going to have dividend income, and then you're going to have your guaranteed income. Your guaranteed income can be your Social Security. It could be your pension. It could be an annuity if you have one. These are all income streams I'm supposed to get the rest of my life, that they're guaranteed to cover me. If your essentials are covered by your guaranteed income, then you're already starting off in a really good space, because then that means I don't actually need to have the 1.7 million now, because I already have my Social Security and my essentials covered. And then we have the Social Security segment where we talk about how do I make sure that I have the right amount of Social Security coming in to cover that. So if your guaranteed income is covering your essentials, we can then move to our second layer, which will be your lifestyle layer. Because right, we're not trying to survive, we're trying to thrive, as they say. But you can't move on to the lifestyle until we make sure our essentials are covered, that we're able to not worry about keeping our lights on, not worry about the food, that we know that these things are already taken care of. When it comes to the lifestyle, you and I are going to differ on this, but I'd be curious, when you think of retirement and you think of owning all of your time, that you separated your time for your money, what would you do with your time if you did not have to worry about spending if money wasn't a concern? What would you do with your time? And for a lot of people, that lifestyle layer is going to be a little different. And then you can share in the comment what you would do with your time. But for a lot of people, they'll say things like travel. That's going to be the most common I hear. I hear pickleball coming up a lot more now. People are getting very intense with pickleball clubs and memberships and different things. That some people want to do the finer things in life. So we'll say fine dining. And I do think that we do want to separate when you do the fine dining versus the regular food, right? So your food could be grocery shopping. Heck, your food could be eating out at restaurants, but then we do want to separate the type of restaurants that you eat out at, whether we consider that the luxury or the essential, because I know that we all differ a little bit on what counts in there. If there's any sort of entertainment that you would think about, and I like that word because it can be anything. Absolutely anything. Some of you may have travel homes, you may have new vehicles that you want to get. All of that stuff would kind of fit in there. And then some people would consider their lifestyle things with their grandchildren, and whether that is supporting them or just doing things with them, where they just take the grandkids with them on the trips, on the cruise, on the different things that they're doing. And for the most part, that's going to be your second layer. And then you'll want to calculate what that looks like. How do I see my retirement? What is the cost of those different events? Then the third layer typically ends up being, right, once we have those two parts done, the third layer ends up being our legacy and our buffer. So people do talk to me often about building generational wealth. That's very important. And I always tell people generational wealth starts with your retirement plan. That if you are unable to cover your own retirement, then you'll have reverse generational wealth, which is where your kids will end up having to subsidize your retirement. So you have to take care of yourself first. And you probably heard a gazillion examples, most common one being the one where you're on an airplane and they automatically, when they're going through the whole thing, the flight attendant will tell you, hey, make sure you put your mask on first, right? And that you do. And I listened to Jim Rome a lot, and he would say, I'll take care of me for you if you take care of you for me, right? And so there's a lot of different ways to think about it, but it is the third one that we are going to start with the foundation of any building, and that has got to be your retirement, your essentials, making sure that you have food on your table and your lights on, and you have your AC going if you live in here in Florida, or it's just hot wherever you're going to be at. And so this could be anything from gifts to your family. So we'll say gifts, and your gifts could be to your family, or it could be to a charity. That we have causes that we believe in. There are places that we've been giving to for a long time. And because of that, we want to keep giving to them. And that's right, that's an okay goal to have, but that needs to be placed in the right bucket, which is that is going to be my legacy. That if I have everything taken care of, then I'm totally fine doing this, but it's not going to be the tail wagging the dog. We do want to have what I would consider our healthcare reserves, right? And so I do normally mention that. And the reason we have the reserves is twofold. Is one is we just get nervous having to go to the doctor, and we have all these copays and different deductibles, and it adds up, right? That's on the one end. On the other end, it's outpacing inflation. That your healthcare expenses typically go up by 6% every year, 4 to 6%, but your regular inflation is somewhere around like 2 to 3%. So because it outpaces inflation, that means that it ends up being something that is in the back of our mind. And that leads to the last one, which is peace of mind. Everyone's peace of mind number is a little bit different. And I'm going to go through a case study so that way you can see how the numbers would actually look. But everyone's number is a little bit different what peace of mind looks like, right? So I'm married, I have 4 kids, my kids are all a little different. And when I meet people, different things, we all have different what peace of mind looks like. That how much of a buffer you need. When you're driving, how much space do you want to leave between you and the next car? And we've been places where the person is right up on our bumper and you're like, what are you doing? And there have been places where you're like, man, there's enough space between the cars that you could get in front of them if you wanted to. That we all have this peace of mind number. And whether that is 1 year's of savings that's set aside, or whether it's 5 years of your living expenses set aside, there is some number that just helps us to relax and not have to worry about things. That's going to be a nice to have, right? So our goal is to make sure, hey, look, at a minimum, we have everything covered. Then we start adding the lifestyle. We have to know what our goals are. I'm a big fan of writing down at least, I used to say 50, but I don't say 50 anymore because I keep getting crazy looks from you all. So I would say write down 20 goals and just 20 things that you want to do, and then put them into the categories of short-term things I could do in less than 12 months, your medium-term things that's going to take me, I don't know, like 5 years plus, and then your long-term goals that maybe take 10 years. And then we start working in that order to accomplish our short-term goals that open up our medium-term goals, that open up our long-term goals. And once we do that, you never go below 20. So anytime you check something off the list, you have to add something else back on. Always have 20 things, because as you live and you experience, we all know our goals and things change based on things that we meet, things we're exposed to, all that stuff. And I do like to encourage people, because I don't want you to purchase all your time back And then you're immediately like, all right, I don't know what to do with my time. And then you're like, I think I'm just bored, so I'm going to go back to work. And I'm like, well, no, right? Spend a little time, understand yourself, see what it is that ultimately is going to tickle your fancy, as they say, right? I don't know if they say tickle your fancy anymore. Your retirement number, right? So then your retirement number then ends up being, wow, that board is not looking good. These two buckets. This is your retirement number. It is your lifestyle plus your essentials. However much that ends up being each year, we would then look at our income streams and then we would see what they generate for us. That if you have all dividends, well, that's a different amount of money that you need than if you have it coming from a business, which is different than if it's capital gains, which is different than if it's interest, which is different than if it's rental income. But we're going to start with the income, and then we're going to see which avenues we are using to generate our three streams of income. And as long as you have your guaranteed income covering your essentials, it does give you the ability to not have to worry about that. And whether or not we're going to talk about some things that I would like to keep up with inflation, ideally, you wouldn't have to worry about investing. But because of inflation, because of government's out of control spending and all the other stuff, you have to invest your money. And the way I normally describe it to people is if you could time travel and you can go back 100 years, leave yourself a safe, and you know where the safe is and you get to open it in 2026, you could leave yourself $100,000 worth of gold bars, $100,000 worth of stocks, $100,000 worth of real estate investment portfolio, or $100,000 worth of cash. What do you hope is not in that safe when you open it? And I think we all agree, oh my gosh, I hope I did not leave myself cash, because I would be so mad if I left myself cash. It's going to be literally worthless. Now, when it comes to the reason that I'm not as big of a fan of the 80% rule, and we'll go through a couple of them, is twofold. One is, as you see, your legacy and your buffer, your 80% rule does not cover that, right? Because these are differences in your current life. So 80% of your life, the assumption is, well, I don't live off 100% of my income now. I save between my investments and certain taxes and my 401k and all this other stuff. I only live on 80% of my money anyways. So I'm just used to already living that. So I can maintain my same lifestyle and I know that everything's covered, right? And so that's the idea. But it completely ignores your legacy and the buffer, which is why we don't normally do that. The main reason that I tend to focus also on not using the 80% is because we have this thing where we have what's called a retirement spending smile. And the reason we say that is because it sort of looks like this. Now I'm being dramatic on it, but when you first retire, you end up spending a lot of money, right? So this is my money meter, because you just retired. You got all your time back. You want to travel, you want to live it up, you want to do all these amazing things. And then somewhere along the way, you sort of get tired of being stuck in the airport. You get tired of all the places. You've traveled a lot. So now you're just kind of chilling. At what point in time we're chilling, that depends on each of us, right? It's going to be a different point of your life. But at some point in your life, you're just starting to slow down a little bit. You're like, I kind of hang out, chill out on my back porch, hang out with my friends. People visit me. I don't really go a lot of places anymore. At some point, we end up decreasing our spending. We don't actually continue increasing our spending. It's not an exponential thing. Then along the way, in the back half of our life, that spending starts increasing again. And the reason it increases again is normally going to be our health care, right? The longer that we live, typically, right? I'm not wishing it on anyone, but typically it ends up being the more that we spend on healthcare. So at the beginning, we're doing all living La Vida Loca, we're having all the fun. In the middle, we're just kind of tired of that life. We're relaxing a little bit more. Maybe we're doing the 23andMe, or right, we're just kind of doing things a little bit more local. And then we have the healthcare expenses towards the end, whatever that end looks like. And because we have that retirement spending smile, and then we also have these buffers, we have the safeties and things like that. That is why the 80% rule doesn't end up working for most people. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to end us with a case study. And for you, all you would do is if you only have Social Security, then you would start by just looking up your Social Security, go to the Social Security website. You can see what your statement is now. If you have the 40 credits, right, just 10 years of working, most likely what most of us do is we work a lot more than that. So we're replacing our lowest years with higher earning years. So it increases how much our Social Security is, right? That's how much we typically have. So if we had someone that had a retirement goal, let's say someone had an essential where someone was like, I need $7,000 a month, right? So if you needed $7,000 a month, we would then start looking at, all right, what is my guaranteed income in this? So we need $7,000 a month. What is my guaranteed income? So first we're going to calculate what their essential is. And so for their essential, we're going to say that that is 4,200 of it. So you look at the things we said. So what's in their essential? That's going to be their mortgage. That's going to be their utilities. That's going to be their food, the medicine, transportation, all of those things that we had already mentioned. That's going to be their actual floor. Then that means that their lifestyle ends up being around 2,800. So in the lifestyle, we're saying, hey, I want to travel. I want to meet people. I want to do all these great things. My friends, when they go on cruises, I want to be able to go on the cruise too. When we go to the fancy restaurant, I dropped my pen. When we go to the fancy restaurant, I want to be able to go to the fancy restaurant too, right? So but we know that that is on the lifestyle, that's more of a luxury. So we're not really thinking about that. They're waiting until 67, so their full retirement age. So that is going to be $3,400. So we're going to say, I'm going to write over here. So we're going to say Social Security is $3,400. And then you can see that that gives us an $800 gap that still needs to be filled. So we would then have to look at our other streams of income and see what we have that is set, where we're able to cover this essentials. And so we're sitting there, we're looking, we're like, all right, what am I going to be able to do to be able to achieve my overall goal? And so for them, they do have investments. So we had about $500,000. So we had like $480,000. And that $480,000 was able to generate about $2,400. So we'll just say investments. So that'd be $2,400. And so that's about $500,000 that they had. And so you can see we're now sitting here at 5,800. So you're at 5,800. So we know at the minimum they have covered their essentials. We know that we're still looking to be able to generate an additional. So we're at like 58. So we wanted to get to 7. So we need an additional $1,200. And so their number, that gap, they would be spending the rest of their working career just to be able to accumulate an additional $1,200, whatever that looks like. Some people will say, yeah, I don't plan on not working. And I like relationships. I like getting out, like meeting people. All this stuff is important to me. I just don't want to work in the job that I have. It's stress. I don't like the people, the politics, however that shakes out. But now that they know their number, they can then put the plan in place, spend the next handful of their years covering whatever that gap is. And then we would go from there. And so for some people, we'll say, hey, you have $500,000, it's going to generate you $2,400 in investments. Are you interested? Are you willing to purchase a business? Are you interested? Are you willing in purchasing real estate? We could also look at changing the investments around where we focus a little bit more on getting a higher return and a higher payout. And so we could focus on REITs, real estate investment trusts. So if you like real estate, but you don't like dealing with people directly, that typically ends up being a great opportunity. The average stock market return of a dividend is about like 2% is what their payouts are. And if you have a REIT, it's about 8% is what it is on average. But once you know what the gap is, you can then start putting the plan in place versus just saying, well, I'm going to live off of 80%, so I'll be fine. Retirement is the gaps that we end up seeing in the income. It has to do with just kind of the complexities and the changing on how we're spending, what we're spending on. And then if you're moving, all those things would come into play as well. So those will all be things that we would think about. All right. So then that, ladies and gentlemen, is our first one. So we are good on the income game. All right. So what we typically find is the time to go and do conversions, it changes for each of us. That the windows come and it goes, that we have a limited opportunity to move money into tax-free accounts. And tonight we're going to go and we're going to talk in a little bit more detail about just how you would do a backdoor Roth. Because I think we all sort of know high level that, hey, there's such a thing as getting some tax-free money. I've heard people call it Roth conversions. What does that look like? How does that work? And we're going to go through a couple of those scenarios. And I will also share with you where those gaps typically end up coming from as well for people, because they do have gaps when it comes to even doing Roth conversions. So we'll talk about the window, how you recognize it. And if you see that you're in that window, you're going to be like, oh, I got to take advantage of it. And that's my hope. My hope is that you're like, okay, I recognize this, so I need to take advantage of it. First and foremost, why do we even have to do a backdoor, right? So let's talk about a front door Roth first. So we're going to talk about a Roth. So a Roth is a tax-free investment. So you put the money in after tax, right? There's 3 tax buckets that we've talked about. You have your pre-tax, you have your after-tax, and you have your tax-free. Your Roth is going to be one of those in the tax-free, but you use after-tax dollars. And after-tax means I've already paid taxes on the money to receive it. So I paid an income tax, I paid some kind of a tax. So it's already my savings account, my bank account, my checking account, whatever that is, it means I already paid taxes on it. It was taxed when it went through my income and I received the check, right? We always receive the difference from our W-2 statement. Because of the income limits, sometimes we can't do this. So the income limits currently is 153 to 168,000 for someone who is single. And these are what we call our income limits. It means that if you make over this, then you're not allowed to use the front door of the Roth. So if you're single and you make somewhere between 153,000 to 168,000, then it's not for you. If you are a couple, it is 242 to 252. So that is a couple. And if you make more than that as a couple, then you don't have the opportunity as well to go through the front door. Now that's okay. It's like, yeah, it'd be nice, but it's okay because we have the ability to go through the back door that does not have the income limits. And for a lot of people, it ends up creating even greater opportunities where the front door has the income limits, but also has a limit on how much you can even convert in a given year. So in 2026, if you were going through the front door, then you can only place $7,500 inside of your Roth a year, right? And you're like, well, if I can only do that, how am I going to have the amount that I need for retirement? And you are correct, my friend, that is not going to be enough for your retirement. Now, if you're 50 plus, they give you a little bit more, give you 8,600 that you can do a year. So congratulations, you have the extra amount. And again, you're going to be like, that doesn't seem like enough. And you would be right that would not be enough for you. So how do we see some people with a significant amount of money inside of these tax-free vehicles, knowing that I'm only able to put about $8,000 in every single year, right? And you would be correct to say that. So the way that you would normally do it is you're going to break it into a couple steps and you talk about doing it through the back door. And the reason we normally would go through the back door is either A, the income limits, or B, is the amount that I can contribute, and I want to contribute more, right? That I want to be able to contribute more. Now, there are some small nuances that can create a taxable event, and we're going to talk about today, particularly how to try to avoid creating a taxable event, right? So that's the goal. That's the plan that we're going to try to accomplish today. So normally when you're going to do a conversion, you're going to contribute to your traditional IRA, right? So that is in your pre-tax, right? So your traditional IRA will be here. It just means you have not paid taxes on it for it to be your pre-tax. But this particular time, what we're going to focus on is we're actually going to do the contributions with after-tax dollars. You're like, well, wait a minute. How do I do that? I'm glad that you asked. Twofold. First and foremost, if you're going to contribute with after-tax dollars, you are most likely going to need to file a 8606 form, right? So I'm trying not to get too technical where your eyes glaze over on me, but this is the form that you use to let Uncle Sam know I did not take a tax deduction on this contribution. I'm just letting you know, Uncle Sam, I'm counting this as my normal income. As a result, I do not want this to be a tax, like a tax deductible contribution. I want it to be considered with taxable income. And you're sitting there like, well, why would you do that? I thought the whole reason we did that is so we don't have taxable income. Well, the thought is I'm trying to do the conversion very quickly. Right? So I want to do the conversion. So we're going to convert within days. And the reasons we want to convert it within days is because if you place the money in there and it's already been taxed, so it's after-tax money, you fill out your Form 8606, right, you're good to go. Uncle Sam's going to say, all right, cool, you've already paid taxes on it, so I'm not going to tax you on the conversion. Now it's a tax-free conversion. If you take the deduction, that means you have never paid tax on the money in there. In fact, you received a tax deduction. It never counted as income for you. And Uncle Sam isn't that nice. Uncle Sam, generally speaking, wants to tax you at least once. And when you start looking at the idea that you get taxed on what you make and like what you earn, and then you get taxed when you invest that money that you earn and what you make, and then you get taxed on what you spend. You get taxed on like your home, gas, sales tax, and grocery stores. But then you also have estate tax, which is like a death tax. And then you get taxed even after you pass. So you get taxed a lot when you really think about it. So Uncle Sam says, if you have an after-tax investment in your traditional IRA and then you convert it within days, the thought is the account hasn't grown. Because if the account grows, well, now you have earned income inside of your IRA, right? And you're like, wait a minute. Well, if you put in $5,000 and it grows to $6,000, Uncle Sam said, yeah, I taxed you on the $5,000. Like, I am not going to tax you on that when you do the conversion. But that $1,000 that you grew when it went up to $6,000, yeah, I'm gonna need some of that back, right? Like, I mean, that's basically how Uncle Sam looks at that. So the idea is if I do it within a handful of days, as a result, it's going to give me the chance to just do the conversion on the money that I put in. So I don't have to worry about that. So what you'll do is you'll then convert that. So we'll convert that to what? To my Roth IRA. So I convert it to my Roth IRA. And then I should, right, ideally, it'll be no taxes on the event. We went through how you would do that conversion so you don't pay taxes on the event. That's what the goal is. So if you have no taxes on the conversion, now guess what happens? The money grows tax-free. That's pretty nice. But oh yeah, my money grows tax-free. And then what? And then you take it out. Tax-free. And again, we feel pretty good about that. These are the goals. How do I keep as much of the money that I earn as possible to where Uncle Sam is not basically using me, right? Where we see the movie The Matrix, where I'm the battery that is funding and filling the system. You and I, that's not what we're trying to do. Now, there is some small nuances. And again, I'm gonna touch on it, but I don't want to overwhelm you. And it's a lot of small pieces as well. So there is a couple of traps. So this is where the gap is. This is where people mess up, right? People are like, all right, cool. I see that. I'm good. I did my 8,600. I put it in there after tax money, converted it. It should be $0. Boom. Why did I receive a tax bill? I'm glad that you asked. There is a rule that Uncle Sam has that is called the pro rata rule. And all pro rata means is that I take the money out based on just like equally from all the buckets. And that's a very fancy way of me saying that if you have a bunch of IRAs and you have one of your IRAs that has after tax money, and so you said, hey, I did it, I had an IRA, already had, let's say, or I'm going to pick numbers to make my life easy for me. So let's say I already had 67,500 that has been tax deductible. So that's going to be my pre-tax inside of my IRA, right? That's already in there. But then I do 7,500 this year after, watching this video, and I did that with my after-tax money. Well, that means your entire account balance is now $75,000, and 7,500 of that is money that won't be taxed, so no tax. So what does that mean? Pro rata means I do the allocation based on just the even amounts. So this is actually 10%. So 10% of the money will be considered no taxes, but 90% will be considered taxable anytime you take the money out. So anytime you take the money out, so I'm going to make the life easy for me. So if you took out $10,000 and you said, hey, I put in 10, I know the account has $100,000 in the IRA between all my IRAs, but 10,000 of that was money I put in with after-tax dollars. So that first 10,000 I take out, I would like you to not tax me. And Uncle Sam would say, no, I'm going to do it pro rata. So I'm going to do it based on the allocation of all the accounts. So if you take $10,000 and try to do a Roth conversion, you will pay taxes on 90% of that conversion, and then you would not be taxed on 10%, because that's how Uncle Sam is going to do the calculation. He's going to say, all right, I'm looking in here. You have 90% that is in your pre-tax account, so that's going to be not taxed, and then you or taxable, and then you have 10% that has been taxed. So I'm not going to tax you on that. So that means every single time you do a Roth conversion, 90% of that would be considered taxable. So the fix to cover that gap, which a lot of people do deal with, they're like, man, I did not know that would happen. I'm like, I know, right? So normally what you'd have to do is you're going to have to roll it over. So you got to get it to zero. There is no other way to get around that pro rata rule except you roll it over to zero. So you would roll it over into your employer 401k, right? And you can have like a 403b if you're allowed to roll it in there. Any of those other pre-tax accounts that have to do with a individual business, because the individual businesses, they get treated individually. Your IRA gets treated, no matter if you have like 10 IRAs, it does not matter. It's going to be treated as one aggregate. Like you have to add them all up together and it's treated as one account, which you'll see when we go through RMDs as well. So you have to roll over your IRAs into a 401k. And then what will that do? Well, that's going to give me a zero balance inside of my IRAs. So now when I do my after-tax conversion, now it's 100% of the money in there that will be a tax-free Roth rollover. But if you don't do that, then it's going to be then taxed based on that pro rata rule that I showed you. So you'll want to just kind of work through that. So an example of that to kind of show you just a little bit what the math could look like. Do I even have? I think I have one. No, I don't have another example. So that was the example, right? So that's how you would do it. All right, so then that is your Roth backdoor. So you place the money in your traditional IRA with after-tax dollars. So that means I already paid taxes on it. Fill out my Form 8606 to make sure that it is not being considered tax deductible. I then convert that within days, because if I let it grow, then my growth is going to be taxed. And then I do my Roth IRA, no taxes. Now it grows tax-free, which is the goal. If I have $5,000 I put in here and then it grows $1,000, well, that $1,000 is now going to be taxed. Versus if I convert it immediately with the $5,000 and then it grows to the same $1,000, that $1,000 is not taxed. To avoid the pro rata rule, you then need to have this account $0 inside of your IRAs because they add them all up together, which means you have to roll it over into some other pre-tax account, right? Some other pre-tax account. For most of you, that's going to be your 401k. If you do that, my friends, then you will be able to do your Roth conversions, and you'll be able to do them without paying any taxes on them. How is that? Does that make sense? Any questions on that portion? Hopefully I didn't lose you. I was like, it's a lot, but I wanted to make sure you had the good information. So hopefully you feel pretty good about that. All right. So then, ladies and gentlemen, doing a fantastic job. Appreciate you all. So once the backdoor Roth, we get the money kind of in the right accounts, we then move into naturally the RMDs, right? So we have the RMD playbook tonight. We're managing the money that is then being forced out. So if I don't have all of my Roth conversions done, I have a certain amount of money that's sitting still inside of my pre-tax accounts, then I know that once I hit 73, Uncle Sam is going to require me to take some money out or I receive a 25% penalty. And so we've already hinted at sort of the idea of having multiple IRAs. So we're going to stay on that track. And we'll talk about how you aggregate them to make sure that we're being strategic about the accounts and which ones that we pull out. Because we do have them as separate accounts and it works in our benefit in some ways, and then it doesn't work in our benefit in other ways. And so we're going to focus on some of the things that you would want to do. Specifically, I'm going to go through 3 different strategies for you. And for this one, I do have a simple one. So I'm going to share with you. Perfect. Okay. So what you'll see here, we have our RMDs, and we'll choose which ones to take the money out of. And I do like to say that there's a handful of strategies, like all things. There are ways that have accounts that are losing, where it lowers the taxable income. Maybe I can do tax loss harvesting. Is there some accounts where the fees are a little bit higher and they're taking more money in fees? And so I can have underperforming accounts. I can have accounts that are just being taxed too much as far as the fees that I'm being charged in those accounts. And we can decide which ones that we would like to do. First thing you have to do is you take all of your traditional IRAs and you aggregate them, which means you add up all the individual accounts, right? That's the first step that you have to do. If you have 3, 4, 5, 8 IRAs, it doesn't matter, add them all up because they're all considered one account, as we just sort of hinted at. But the good news is after you figure out what your required minimum distribution is, you can then choose which account you take that amount out of. And that there are a handful of ways that you could choose them. So number 1 is you get rid of just the highest fees. Number 2 is you get rid of the worst performing ones. That if I have IRAs that are losing and for whatever reason I just don't feel like dealing with them, I have other ones that are doing really well. Instead of just trying to match the ones doing really well, which sometimes that has you buying high and then selling low, right? Because you're selling the ones that are losing, which is selling low, and then you're buying the ones that are winning, you're sort of buying high. So you want to be cautious of that. But if I sell, because I have to sell them anyways, I let my winners keep winning. So like, I have my couple IRAs that have performed really well. I'm just going to let my winners win. I'm just going to ride those waves, not even going to think about it, so that I can choose those accounts first. And I get to decide which ones I want to do. Strategy number 2 is we coordinated with the Roth conversions that we just went over. And so we could take the RMDs from the same IRA, and then we can convert it. And we're able to decide that, hey, I can see which accounts I want to do, how I want to do this. Now, it is important to remember you have to take the money out first, and then you do the conversion second. You do have the 401k exception, which we just used to be able to take advantage of having the tax-free conversions for our Roth, where we didn't have a taxable event. And it's just that your 401ks, you cannot aggregate them together. You would have to take each of your individual 401ks and then you would divide that by each of your factors. And for those that hadn't seen it or don't remember your factor table, there's a couple of different tables, but for most of you, you're just going to have the normal single one. That there are some where your spouse, I think it's if you're 10 years or greater apart, it's either 10 or 20, but I think it's 10. But if you and your spouse are further than 10 years apart, then you have a different table. But the process is the same. I go find my table, I then look at my age, and then based on that age, I am then giving a certain factor, and then I divide my total IRA accounts or my each individual 401ks from each employer by my factor. So if I'm 73, my factor is 26.5. If I'm 75, my factor is 24.6. If I am 90 years old, my factor is 12.2. What you recognize is the longer that we live, the smaller the number gets, which means the higher the amount that we have to take out. And what I typically have seen is if you are just taking out the bare minimum, right? So you're just like, look, I don't really spend all this. I'm sort of fine. I have like a pension, I have my Social Security. I really don't need to take this money out. I'm just taking it out to avoid the fee. The amount ends up getting higher. And the reason it gets higher is because your account is typically still going to be covering the amount that you're taking out. So it's like your account is growing each year. And it is something that you want to think about. And that's why we end up looking at these conversion windows, because you don't want to take the money out just to avoid taxes, but you also don't want to just give 25% to Uncle Sam. And so it just puts you in a really tough spot. And that's why we try as much as we can to find these windows and these opportunities so that we can take advantage of it a little bit earlier. The next portion is if you have an inherited IRA. So if you receive your IRA from someone who had passed, then it doesn't get aggregated, right? Unless you're your spouse, then you sort of have a couple of extra options. But for most of us, it does not get combined with the rest of the IRAs. It's kind of its own separate one. And so then you would still do the factors, but you would just go through the numbers. So I do have a example for you, right? So if we add up all of our IRAs, we have $650,000. We can see that for someone at the age of 75, that the factor would be 22.9, right? So someone at the age of 75 would be 22.9. I feel like the number was actually a little bit different, but the process is the same. So for this one, we'll take the 650K, we'll divide it by the 22.9, and we end up with $28,384. And so then we could take the amount from the IRA that we choose. So we can choose the one that have the highest fees. We choose the ones that are the worst performing, but we get to decide which one. That we have 6 of them, they total 650, but we don't have to take out whatever, like $5,000 from each one. We can take out all 28 from one and be just fine. So then as a result, we're able to get rid of the worst performing, we get rid of the worst cost, and then these are 3 better performing ones for us to be able to keep working. And so we have the same RMDs, we have to take it out anyways, but now we've given ourselves the opportunity to be able to take it out in a way where we get to keep more of our money, which I do think is ultimately the goal, right? The goal is to be able to get rich once, as I've heard it said. And I'm someone that thinks that that's a fantastic way of describing it. I just want to get rich once. I don't need to lose it all to rebuild it all. I could, but I don't want to have to do that. So when it comes to managing what comes out of our IRAs, right? Naturally, we discovered that that's one part, but we do know that ultimately for viewers, we're going to retire at different times. Some of us are going to retire a little bit earlier. And that for some people, when you're retiring earlier, you're then thinking, all right, how does that match with my Social Security, my earnings, and different things? Like, how do I decide what makes the most sense for me? And for some, if you retire earlier than 62, 65, then really start thinking, okay, what does that look like as far as me covering my expenses to make sure that everything is taken care of? So we're going to break that into 2 parts. First, we're going to talk about the Social Security, and then we'll talk about the Medicare and how you cover your healthcare expenses as well. So we're talking about the Social Security Advantage. That is our biggest guaranteed income stream, and it ends up being our biggest tax opportunity as well. And so we're going to go through the earnings test today, because the earnings test and the way that rule works, it does throw people off just a little bit. But there's also legislation where I've seen it discussed where people are like, man, should we even have the earnings test anymore? Because are we taxing people? Are we disincentivizing people working, knowing that Social Security is not looking good? Where I went to the website today and it said Social Security is expected to run out by 2035. That's its current projection. And that number changes on the website depending on how much we spend and how much we generate in money. So the number, it does change around a lot. But as recent as I think it was like 2025, but kind now it's still there. But there is a Senior Citizens Freedom to Work Act that the Senate and the House, they had approved it. And it's just kind of sitting there in the chambers. People are like, yeah, that seems like a good idea. Maybe we shouldn't penalize people who want to keep working. It has not been signed into law yet. So until it gets signed into law, when it does, I'll come out and put a video and we can talk about it. But as of right now, it's not signed into law. And because of that, we'll go ahead and I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so let's go back to the whiteboard and I will go through that for you, ladies and gentlemen. All right. So currently we're talking about the Social Security test. We're basically saying if you take out Social Security and you're still working, right? What does that end up looking like? That there are really two main rules that you would use to calculate that. So if you are under full retirement age, so I'm just going to say FRA to make it a little easier for me. So if you're under the full retirement age, the current earnings limit is $24,480. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, Dre, that's pretty much going to be any type of a job. And you're right that if you basically have any type of job, right? But a lot of part-time jobs are going to make more than that. If you have Social Security started and you're still working, then you're going to have $1 if you're under your full retirement age, right, all year. I probably should add the all year, and you'll know why in a moment when I give that to you. So all year. Then you will have a $1 penalty for every $2 over. So you have a $1 penalty for every $2 that you are over the limit. So what would that look like? I'm glad that you asked. Right. So if I was, let's say you had a part-time job and you were making $33,400. $33,400. Pull out my calculator. So the first thing you would do is you would subtract the amount, right? Because we said if you're making anything over that. So I have to be making it over that. So if I do my 33,400 and I subtract my 24,480, that ends up giving me $8,920 is how much I made over, right? So we'll just say over limit. Because I get penalized $1 for every 2, I'm going to divide this number by 2, because that will then let me know how many dollars my penalty is. And so that'll be $4,460. That is going to be the amount that is withheld this year. Now, it's important to mention that this is temporary. And what I mean by this is temporary, it means that once you do reach your full retirement age and you retire, they will recalculate what your Social Security benefits are. So if you said, hey, I'm starting my Social Security at 62, you have the smaller amount based on the income that you had, the amount that gets withheld and taken back by Social Security then gets given back to you and aggregated out into your new monthly amount, right? So that is what you would, if you receive Social Security, still working, and you're under the full retirement age. It's important to write under the full retirement age. The difference when you reach the full retirement age, so basically, if that is the year, reach your full retirement age, right? So that's this year. So we'll just use this year. So we'll say in 2026, then the number is a little bit higher. So now your limit is $65,160. $160 a year. And if anything over that, you'll have $1 withheld for every $3 over. All right, so it works. It works a little bit more in your favor, where the penalty is not as much. Now it's 1 for every $3, and then also it's going to be a much higher amount. As a result, if you're taking it, you reach your full retirement age, then in our same case study example where you had the 34,000, well, that's not going to be over that, so you would have nothing withheld, right? So you would have nothing withheld. That would not be a concern whatsoever for you. Now that's for the year of. Also important to mention that this year of is just until you actually reach 67. So for me, right, I have the birthday of May, so I would have that penalty until May, and then once I reach May, that penalty is gone. Now, once you reach your full retirement age, it goes away. And so the benefits, they're not lost. That's the most important thing. So at full retirement age, Social Security, they will permanently recalculate how much your monthly income is, and then you'll receive that amount back. So then naturally, the part people will ask is, all right, well, then does everything count as earnings to readjust my Social Security? And I'm glad that you asked that question, because no, everything does not count as earnings, my friend. So when we say, does everything count as earnings? We're like, no, it doesn't count as earnings. So there's two things that will not count as earnings, right? Or two things that do count. So when I say count, that is going to be my wages from working, right? Just like my regular job, so no harm, no foul there. And then any self-employment income. So we'll take the net self-employment. So those will count. So on the other side, when we say don't count, right? My must be moving too quickly. So I need to move the pen a little slower so that it shows up. Your rental income will not count. Your dividend income will also not count in this particular situation. If you have any interest income, right? So we're just going through all the other streams of income. If you have a pension or an annuity, that will not count as well. So those would not count as your earned income for those years. So if you have any dividends, investments, rental, interest, pensions, annuities, none of those would end up counting. And so that's right, that's important for us to be able to remember. So for the example that I have for you, I'm glad that you asked. So we have someone that claimed Social Security at 63, right? So I'm gonna scroll down. So we're gonna say we claimed at 63. And then the amount that they received for claiming at 63 was $1,600 a month. And at first they weren't going to work, but they were offered some part-time opportunities. And so they took those part-time opportunities. And so their part-time work, right, paid them $45,000 a year. Right. Or $45,000 a year. So we're 63. So that means we are not reaching the full retirement age. So we're under. So that's $24,480 ends up being the amount that we would subtract. $24,480 ends up being the amount that we would take away. And then that would have us with $20,520 over the limit. And then as you are aware, we would then divide that amount by 2. And so then Social Security would withhold $10,260. Right, so we would divide that by 2. Why is that? Because we know that it's $1 withheld for every $2 over. So then we would divide that in half to be able to see what the amount is that we are over. And then that would give us the $10,260. All right, so that is withheld, right? So that amount is withheld. And then we have our net Social Security received. So that would be around $8,940 versus the $19,200 expected, right? So we expected, take our 1,600 times 12, we had expected to receive 19,200. But because they are withholding 10,000 of that, then we would only receive 9,000. Not to mention, the provisional income tax. And if you haven't seen it, I think that was week 1 that I went through the provisional Social Security tax. The amounts on those are really low as well. So in this particular one, you're going to be in the 85% of your Social Security will be taxable. And when you take all of that in consideration, so we have someone 63, they're going to get $1,600 a month. At $1,600 a month was going to generate $20,000 for them a year. Because they're still working and receiving $45,000, which puts them over the amount by $20,000, $10,000 of their Social Security is withheld. It's basically half of their Social Security, right? So now they have the $10,000 that they get to keep of their Social Security, but then it gets taxed at 85% with the provisional income. So it becomes one of those things where it's like, yeah, I understand that what you're thinking is it's in my best interest. It's my money. I paid into it. So I want to get it as soon as possible. But then when you're looking at how much you get to keep, then it's like, all right, well, if that's the whole picture, and I'm already still working part-time, then whether you want to do the earnings test, the Social Security taxation, right, that it's probably would have been in her best interest to have delayed it. All right, that it probably, when you look at how much she nets keeps, that's probably in her best interest to have delayed her Social Security, right? So that probably would have been her best choice there. And so, right, as we talk about, there's literally over 200 ways to calculate a Social Security strategy, but this was one of them, right? So this was one of them. So when you look at the amount that, if you're still working, that you get to keep, and then you look at the provisional Social Security tax, if you're still working and you're able to wait, then yeah, it's probably going to be in your best interest to just wait. But that's right, it's just the way that sometimes the cookie crumbles, as they say. All right, so the next one we'll have is more like, hey, Dre, what do I do if my IRMA determination, right? I'm just like, yeah, Dre, they're really like, I got moved into a higher tax bracket, not very excited about that. What will be the options available for me? And right, so this one, and actually I misspoke not last week because we met last week. I misspoke the week before, where I had said that your IRMA was calculated once from 63 and it wasn't calculated again. Your IRMA is actually calculated every single year, and it's a 2-year look back. So I had misspoke on that. So I was glad to be able to clear that up as we talk about our Medicare meter. I think, Ronald, you had asked me about that, and I had gotten it wrong. So I wanted to clear that up. So because it is a 2-year look back every single year, and then you can have where you have your Medicare premiums, your IRMAs added this year. If you're like, hey, I put on a new roof, and then boom, you have IRMA in 2 years when they look back. And then you can say, well, the next year I didn't take out anything for the roof, so I don't have to worry about that. We could be doing Roth conversions, and you could be like, all right, I have a higher amount. And then you can look and be like, hey, now I have a lower amount. So it's there 1 year, it's gone the next year. And that is true. It's calculated every single year. So for any of you that are dealing with IRMA and you're 65 this year, then they're going to look at what your 2024 tax return said, right? So that's how they're going to make that decision. For any of you that are retiring next year, they're going to look at your 2025. Right? And then if you're already retired, they'll also adjust based off of that as well. Now, you do have the opportunity to file an appeal. And so there is a handful of qualifying events that they give you that allow you to apply for an appeal. And there's also going to be, sometimes it's just as simple as, I'm retired. You know what? I had a phenomenal job. I was making $300,000 a year, and I'm retired, and I don't make $300,000 a year anymore. And your retirement counts. Your retirement counts as one of those. And so we can have it where you have a retiree earn $285,000 example, yeah, basically like $300,000 in 2024, but now you live on $65,000 in retirement. And because of the amount that you had when they look back for the 2 years, your IRMA surcharge ends up being about $10,000 a year per couple based on the income that doesn't exist anymore. That you can't appeal that, and oftentimes people do. And so most retirees, they're not aware that they even have the option to appeal it. And if you just place the SSA 44 form into Google, it'll show up the form, you can fill it out, and then you can fill out which of the qualifying events that you would like them to take a look at. There's 8 qualifying events where you have to prove it, right? You don't get to just say it was that. Whether you want to send them the letter that says, hey, I retired, right? I'm retired now. So you have a form that the company gives, and like, yeah, Dre's retired. So that's not what he's making anymore. And Social Security will be like, all right, cool. You also could say marriage. Like, man, we had us a phenomenal wedding, and I don't really live that life. I just had to do it that one time. You have divorce, where there's a divorce decree that's requiring you to take out a certain amount of money, whatever that is. Like, right, you sell the house, one keeps the house. You don't know how to do it. Well, you may have to take out half of the house's value from some of your funds. Well, that's going to be an income producing event for you. It'll be a taxable event. So if you're like, hey, I got a divorce, I can show you the divorce decree. That's not how I'm living. Again, that would count as a qualifying event. Death of a spouse as well, work stoppage or reduction. We talked about that. Lost income producing property, right? Prove that the money isn't there anymore. The golden goose is gone. You can loss of your pension income. Again, we're just proving that my life has changed, that I don't have that money anymore. You can have a settlement where you received a lot of money, right? So in Florida, we have the FRS system. We have a drop program. You receive a large lump sum of money. Maybe you did a conversion of some kind. You rolled it over. You did something, a roof, who knows? But you have something that qualifies as an employer settlement. And then any other significant income reduction. Now, if you just spent the money and it was because you really love pickleball and you traveled all over the world and played pickleball in every single continent and had a great time, if you did a bunch of cruises and traveling and things like that, all those are phenomenal, but those would not fall into those 8 qualifying events. As you can see, as the lien is, I don't actually have that money anymore, so you should not expect me to be able to maintain this, right? And like that's pretty much the position that we're taking. And for most people, it's going to end up being the retirement. Like, I was making a lot of money. My highest income earning years is 45 to 65 for most people. And as a result, I don't have that job anymore. I'm not making that money. Fill out the form, tell them you're retired, send them the documents that prove that you're retired. And then you can have a new income that's estimated. They'll go through the forms, they'll look through, and then you'll get the approval or not. And so, but obviously, you keep paying your Medicare bill while it is pending, and then they send you the amount back, the difference back. Some people will like, oh, I'm not paying them, Dre. I'm like, oh, you know what I'm saying? I wouldn't do that, right? I'll go ahead and pay them, and then you'll give them the amount back as well. And so if you do not remember, and I can show you, so you have your IRMAA table for 2026, and there are so many different places that you can see those IRMAA tables, but I'll show you some of them pretty quickly. And so you can see what the deductibles, and where's my IRMAA table, coverage for the B amount. All right, so you can see it's like, hey, if I make less than or equal to $109,000 or $218,000 as a couple, then I would expect to pay $202.90 a month. If you make more than that, but less than 137, then you would expect to have an extra $81 that you would pay every single month for that year. And that would be what your IRMAA, your income related monthly adjustment amount is. The amount goes all the way up to, if you have greater than $500,000 of income or $750,000 of income as a couple, then you would have basically an extra $500 a month that is added to your Medicare Part B. You also have your Medicare Part D that has the premiums attached to it as well. Scroll down to the Part D. That is your prescriptions. So you can see that we still have the same tables, and then the amount is a little bit different. So you're just paying, you'll have nothing if it's under that. And then if it's over that amount, it goes from $14.50 all the way up to $91 that you'll pay every single month that you have that income up that year, right? And so then you get to figure out what makes the most sense for you to ensure that you don't have that going forward. So the years that we have it, we have the A are like, hey, I know in 2 years this is going to come up. So I'm just already going to have, while it's fresh in my mind, I'm going to fill out my Social Security form. I'm going to take the documentation that proves that this is one of my 8 qualifying events. I'm ready to go. And then when the time comes, you're ready, right? You'll file it, you'll show them the documents, and then you'll go from there. And then you can cite it, and you get to receive that difference. And that difference, as you saw on that table, can add up to a lot, especially if you're in the highest one, where it's literally $500 extra a month. That's $6,000 a year. And so if you're able to give yourself $6,000 back, why not? Right? Why not? Now, some people are like, oh, Uncle Sam, it does. It takes Uncle Sam a long time. You ever been to the DMV? You know it takes Uncle Sam a long time. You ever sat in those waiting rooms? You know it takes Uncle Sam a long time. But you're worth it, right? And that's the way I look at it. You're worth it. Take the time, sit in the office. You'll be annoyed, but it's definitely worth your time. Okay. All right, so we'll move into the bracket game. If you are enjoying this, of course, give me a thumbs up. Let me know. I always appreciate that. Appreciate that. Okay, so we're going to move into the bracket game. So we have our strategies for charitable contributions. We have our business owner strategy, and then we have our legacy and the last case study where we show it all together. So if I have my charitable contributions, and this happens a lot. I remember when it happened to me, right? So I'm not even talking right to you, like not to me. I'm talking to me, talking to Pastor Dre, who would give money to his church and he would get his forms and he would like file them and he put it in his TurboTax. And the TurboTax would be like, well, I'm sorry, you didn't contribute enough. You're just going to go with the standard deduction. And I'm like, man, I kept track of everything. And it was like, yeah, it wasn't enough. So I'm just going to give you your standard deduction. Sorry. And you'll be sitting there like, man, I did all that work. And it's like, yeah, you did all that work and you get no credit for it, right? So I think we've all sort of been there at least once. So this strategy is how you're able to help yourself out to be able to get more than the standard deduction. Because you and I, we're doing our best and we're like, man, I'm keeping track of everything. So this is called bunching, right? So we're going to have charitable bunching. And it's sort of as it sounds. You can say batching. We're just going to put our contributions together to where it pushes our income and our deductions up enough to where we're able to write off more in this year. So we're going to have like no bunching, and then we're going to have bunching. And you're going to see how this strategy ends up working. So let's say we're going to make the math easy for me. As you know, I like the math to be easy for me. So if you have no bunching, and then you were to give $1,000 every single month, so then that would give you $12,000 a year. Right? So year one, $12,000 that I gave to my church. Then when you look at all of your itemized contributions together, let's say you had like 19,500. Right? Well, as you and I both know, if that is how much you have, then you're just going to take the standard deduction. Because we weren't able to make the magic happen. Well, okay. Right. You know that's what I was trying to do. Which I believe is 32,500 for a couple. Oh, 32,200. 32,200 for a couple. I'm going to clean that up. Right, so then that would be what would happen in year one. I'm like, well, dang it, I gave the money to the church and I get no credit for that. You'd be like, no, you get no credit for that. So then year two, I do the exact same thing. Year two, and I'm like, all right, what am I going to do year two? Well, I do $1,000 a month, make math easy for me. And then for my itemized amount, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to keep that at 19,500. Which, of course, as you are also well aware, that is not going to break my standard deduction. So I'm going to, again, take the standard deduction, which is 32,200. I did all the work, I kept all the receipts, but I did not break the amount, which then gives me, so then my 2-year total is what? My deduction is going to be 200, 200. So that is 64,400. But my charity work was $0. Uncle Sam did not care. I mean, he cared, but he didn't care because I wasn't able to have an itemized amount enough that made sense for me to do something other than the standard deduction, right? I think we've all probably been there at least once. We're like, man, I had the receipts, I did all the work, and I don't get any credit for that. So then you're like, all right, well, Dre, then how do you bunch, right? Like, what's the idea of bunching? And of course, as always, I'm glad that you asked. So the idea of bunching so in year one, I will open something called, right, a DAF. And that is a donor advised fund. So Obsidian Wisdom, we are able to open these for our clients as well. And they do end up liking these. And I do have a more detailed strategy that I'm going to go through when we talk about having the generational wealth section of this. But the simple idea of a donor advised fund is it's like having a irrevocable trust. And for those that don't know, irrevocable means you don't get to undo it. And because you don't get to undo it, it then counts as an immediate gift. So I don't know who I'm going to give the money to, right? I don't know which charity I'm going to give the money to. The assumption is I'm going to give it to my church because that's who I always give it to, right? They're 501c3, so they're already set up. But if you didn't know, it's okay. You're just going to place it in your donor advised fund. And because it is irrevocable, that means that you no longer have control over it. And because you no longer have control over it, it now counts as immediate gift all this year, right? So it counts as a gift for all this year. So what you would do is you would say, all right, I'm going to, instead of doing my 1,000 every single month to have my 12,000, I'm going to front load this. And so in year one, I'm going to place 2 years. So I'm going to put $24,000 inside of my donor advised fund. Now I don't have to give the extra $24,000 all this year. So I can still, once it's in the fund, I can still do $1,000 every month over the next 2 years. I can still do that. Nothing has changed from that perspective. But now, because my deductions, so we can have our normal itemized deductions, but now I added that extra little bit. So you have the amounts that you get to write off with your state, you have the amount that you get to write off with your charity. And as a result, for some people, you'll end up having, for this one, so you'll have the 24,000, and then you'll end up with about 4.5, right? So 4,500 that you get to write off with the state. And as a result, now I get to do my itemized deduction. And the amounts is not, it's like less about the amount that we choose. It's more about the idea that if I place it in the donor advised fund, it's not in my control anymore. So now it counts as a gift, even though I haven't given it to anyone. I can allocate the trades inside of this fund, and all of the growth is now tax-free because it's not mine. It goes to the charity, and it's right. They don't pay taxes, right? But the 501c3, they don't pay taxes on the money. So when the money goes to them, they don't pay taxes on it. So you have the growth, and you can place a small amount. You gotta let it grow, but you sort of get to work through the numbers. So in this one, now we end up with $36,000. So we went from our 32.2 to 36. Now year two is going to look exactly the same as year one. So I guess technically it won't look exactly the same because you're going to have $0 that you contribute in the actual year two, right? Because we already counted it, even though we placed the 24,000 in there, and even though we're taking out $1,000 every single month, so we're still giving to our church the $1,000 every single month. It's not in year two, right? You did it all in year one. You bunched it. And so year two, we do nothing, and then we will do our itemized deductions, but we already know it's not going to work. So then we're just going to take our standard deduction. So if you take your standard, you have your 32,200. Now, when you're looking at your total, you can see that now you're sitting there, you have your 36,000 that you got to deduct the first year, you got your 32,200 that you got to deduct the second year. So that leaves you with, adding the two together, leaves you with 68,200. Now, some will say, well, Dre, I don't know if that's worth it. You're doing the same thing, in my humble opinion. Obviously, you can give more if you want, and you can set it up for even more, but that ends up being an extra $3,800. And that extra $3,800 ends up being about 340 bucks of additional tax savings, right? Was it 300 or was it? Yeah, it was 800. Yeah, 840. So 840 of more tax savings. So opening up a donor advised fund, people will love to do it. The money gets mailed. You look up in it has all the 501c3s. You would then say, all right, based on the list of my 501c3s, I'm going to choose my church, and they will send the church the check by mail. Right, so they'll send it by mail. They're not going to send it to you, right, because it's written to them. Right, I know you're thinking, well, I can take it and then I can drop it in the collection plate. I'm sorry, you don't get to drop it in the collection plate. People will look at you thinking that you're not giving, but you know that you are, and that's all that really matters, right? Is your relationship with God. It doesn't matter if people can't tell that you're not giving or you are giving. And so as a result, you can have that set up. And as we can see, so you contribute $24,000 in the first year, you get the big deduction in the first year. And then you could keep going. You could do a grant to a college. You can give it to your church. You can give it to your mosque. You can give it to your synagogue. You give it to whoever you want. And the charities, they keep giving the gift every year, but you got your deduction front loaded, because if you did it every year, you were never able to get past the itemized deductions. And because of that, it just wasn't working in your best interest. So what do you think about that? Right? Hopefully you think that's pretty cool. All right. So now, ladies and gentlemen, we are more than halfway there. So I'm pretty excited about that. We are looking really good. For many of you, when we're talking about the bracket game, if you have times where you have more money coming, less money, different times, we try to look at our tax brackets to make sure we keep as much of our money as we possibly can. Because ultimately, what's the point of making the money if you don't get to keep it? And Uncle Sam is definitely playing the game aggressively to take as much money from you as he possibly can. So that means we have to play the game equally aggressively to make sure we can keep as much of our money as we possibly can. And that is why we try to keep track of this stuff. So hopefully that one works for you. Manage the tax brackets, get the higher deductions, keep more of your money in your pocket. So we're moving on to the business. As a business owner, for a lot of us, we'll end up selling them. They say that there is about 15,000 people retiring every single day, that there are literally thousands of businesses that are closing because the business owner didn't have a plan in place on how to sell it or anything like that. And if that is the situation that you're in, well, right, we don't want that. So the moves that business owners, they normally will make before they ultimately sell their business, we're going to focus right on that. So we're going to focus on the business sale, largest financial event most business owners will ever experience. And as a result, it becomes a big opening for a taxable event if we have not planned properly, which is kind of a big if, but it is the big if. So for most of us, when you're looking at this is probably going to be one of the more complex of the topics, just because of how many moving pieces there are. But when you're looking at the tax structure, there is a competition between the one buying the business and the one selling the business, where how is this income exchanging hands? How is it seen? Now, if the business structured in a way where it's ordinary income, you on the receiving the ordinary income, you get taxed up to 37%. You as the person selling it, you don't want that. You have long-term capital gains, that's going to be 20%. You would ideally want to have capital gains because that's going to be about half of the tax rate. But for the most part, it ends up being a combination of the two. And because of the choice between an asset sale versus a stock sale. So the buyers, they will prefer an asset sale. Why? Because they get to the step up on the depreciation of the assets, right? They get the step up basis. That helps them with their taxes. But you, as the one selling the business, you actually would prefer to have it as stock so that everything is capital gains. There is no income. It's all capital gains. And that is where that discussion comes and why it's so important to already be aware of this ahead of time. Because if you're not, they're going to be like, hey, I'd love to just pay you in all cash. You're going to be like, ooh, that sounds good. Like, I want some cash. But then you find out the way it's structured in the contract, you're being taxed at 37% of it. And you're like, man, I should do it differently. Another another lever that you have is deciding that I would like to have installment sales. It's a very fancy way of saying that I want to spread out my payments. So you want to spread out your payments over how long? Right? Normally like 5 to 10 years. I don't want to be waiting forever. So if you have the installment sales, that is normally going to be 5 to 10 years. And as you would imagine, right, if I have $1 million business and it's going to move me into a 37% tax bracket, if I received it all in 1 year, that means that if I received $100,000 every year over 10 years, well, that's completely different. Especially if you end up not having any other forms of income, then you're really managing your taxes significantly, where now you're in the 20% and you're feeling a lot better. If you were able to, so the next one you would do would be, I would have the stocks. Now, if you were able to pull this off, then you would have capital gains. And if you had capital gains, that is going to be 0 to 20%. So you feel pretty good about that. Now that varies because, as I mentioned to you, it ends up being a mixture on the give and the take. So it's probably not going to be all capital gains, but you'll probably have a mix of capital gains and a mix of ordinary income. Because the person who is buying it will like the asset appreciation to depreciate the asset so they can save money on taxes. And if it's all capital gains, they don't get the step up in basis. So you'll have to have that discussion with them as well. The next one, and we're just going to go over a handful of them because, again, it can get very complicated. And if it's something that if you are thinking, what is my business? What are my options as far as selling my business? Then we can meet and discuss. So you have the QSBS. QSBS. And then you have that exclusion. All we're saying is that you can have up to $10 million excluded. Remember, we have an incentive-based tax system. I tell you all that all the time. We have an incentive-based tax system. It's a very fancy way of saying that Uncle Sam rewards certain behaviors over others. And being a business owner is one of those where there's a lot of opportunity available for you that Uncle Sam is very interested in incentivizing people to have businesses and have long-term businesses and to structure them in a way that shows that they're interested in being around for a long period of time. So for you to be able to achieve that, you would need to have a C Corp that you held for 5 years, right? We're just keeping it nice and simple. You have it structured as a C Corp is taxed differently. And then if you're 5+ years, Uncle Sam's like, you're not just trying to flip a business. You're a business owner. You provided people jobs. You provided me tax revenue. I would like to reward you, right? That's basically what Uncle Sam is saying. I would like to reward you. So that is a qualified small business stock, right? So and then that's like, if you Google it, you'll also want to Google section like 1202. So you'll do that, have a C Corp, more than 5 years, up to $10 million, completely excluded from the federal capital gains. And it's easily one of the most valuable options that's available to people because for most of your small businesses, it's not going to be more than that, but at least you don't have to even think about that portion of it. Right. And so we can see, all right, so there are some options that are available and they can work with me. There are some who will set up a charitable remainder trust. I think I spelled that wrong, and that's okay. So if you want to have a remainder trust, so we're going to say CRT, Google it. The idea of the charitable remainder trust. So when I say the remainder, it means that the remainder goes to the charity. So you get the income. So you sell the business, it goes in the trust. Now that becomes a non-taxable income for you, so it's tax-free. And then you get paid the income the rest of your life. Right? So your CRT gets the the sale. So that's a tax-free sale on the business. And then you get an income for however many years you structure it. But that's all you wanted. You wanted your retirement income. So you get your income and then you pay tax on the income as you receive it, because then you get the income. But the amount that you sold the business for, that is not a taxable event for you. The trust receives it. And because it's a charitable trust, again, the charities don't pay taxes. So that makes it a tax-free event for them. So then you get paid income. And then when you pass, the trust gets the remainder. That's why it's called, or the charity, sorry. The charity gets the remainder. And they get whatever remains. And that's why it is called a charity remainder trust. So you can set that up. And whether you want to have a family structure in a certain way where the family owns this trust and we get to decide what charities we want to give to, like a philanthropic arm of your family, you can totally do that. You get to decide how you want that remainder to be done. For some people, there's just certain places that they've always loved. They've always kind of planned on leaving something for them. They never really they didn't have kids, or they weren't worried about all of the money. They just wanted to be able to live their life. And you can design the trust like that. Get the income the rest of your life. Whatever ends up being left, that's what goes to the charity that you wanted to. And I've spoken at different churches and places where I go through that, some nonprofits where I go through that, because they're like, hey, I would like you to show that to our people, right? We have our older members who is 60% of the budget, right? I mean, it ends up being a crazy number. We want to make sure that they are thinking of us in their estate plan. And be like, sure, I can show them what a charitable remainder trust looks like. And then you can see if it makes sense for them. You also have, and this is the last one that we'll talk about here for the business, because there's a lot of moving pieces, but I don't want to overwhelm you by going through all of them. But we also have opportunity zones. And when you think of an opportunity zone, there are certain places that your government would really like to incentivize you to invest. And if you invest in these certain places, which we call opportunity zones, then Uncle Sam will not tax you on the investment the same. The growth and the investment is a very nice way. He's trying to revitalize normally an area that does not have a lot of investments from other people. Now, like all things, it's a trade-off. So some people will say, well, with gentrification, and then people can't live there. Other people will say it's investing money in the community that would not have received any. So that's definitely a plus, that there's a trade-off, right? But opportunity zones are normally going to be in places that don't have as much investments, that a lot of people can't see the vision for it. And the government just wants to incentivize you, allow you to not have to pay taxes on some of the growth, write off some of the investments, and then you get to defer and reduce just your capital gains. So you put the money into one of these funds, and then it reduces the amount that you receive, and it reduces the amount that you have as capital gains, but you're able to generate a return from these investments. That when you go into these communities, you revitalize them, you invest in them, you're able to receive that rental income, however you structured it. But you have a business, you receive the whatever it is that how you structured it, but the opportunity zone lets you keep more of that income, where you don't have to take as much of it. So if you had, right, so I'm going to do a quick installment math for you just to show you that one. So let's say you were going to, I think I'll move this over just a teensy bit. So let's say you were going to sell a business for $2 million. All right, so let's say you had a business, you had $2 million that was available, you did a great job, everybody loves your business. Well, if you're going to have your taxes that you have to pay, let's say that you're able to win the argument. So it's completely structured as long-term capital gains, but it's going to be in the 20% bracket. So that would have you with about $357,000. And so we're going to have the 20% long-term capital gains. And then you also have where is it? I know I have it here. You also have your net investment income tax, your NNIT. and that amount will differ. So we're going to have that on about 1.5 of it. So we're going to say you're able to have 500,000 not counted, right, between like you and your spouse. And so we'll say 1.5 of that gets taxed at the 3.8%. Like the 3.8% NIIT. And that's how we got to this number, right? So then that is, I didn't do anything. I just sold it. I took the money. I felt really good. You'll be paying about $357,000 in taxes. Now, if you had spread that over even the most simplest, right? So over the most simplest 5 years, right? We're not even going to talk about the more complex stuff with the trust, the opportunity zones, or the qualified small business. We're just saying, hey, what if we just took 400K a year? What if we just took 400K a year over the 5 years? What would that end up looking like for me? And then that amount would put you in the 15% bracket, and then you would not have the net interest tax. So as a result, now you would end up being able to save roughly about $100,000, right? So we're around $75,000 to $100,000 that your taxes is going to be somewhere now. So I need to say per year. And so you will save somewhere around 75 to 100K. Because here I'm only going to have 15% long-term capital gains. So I end up saving that amount. I did not change much of the business. Now, obviously, this requires you to believe in your business, right? You believe your business is going to be good. It's going to make money for 5 years. This person's just going to pay you from the revenue that your business is generating. No harm, no foul. You don't have to take all the amount in. You get 400,000 each year. Pay your capital gains at a lower amount. Keep more of your money. You don't trigger any of the extra taxes because you're right. You're over you're over a certain amount. You put yourself in a really good spot. And you're like, all right, I can see, right? I can see. And it's just about having a plan in place that if you plan on selling your business, you already know you have to do a handful of things. Like you have to have your books in order. You have to have the SOPs, the standard operating procedures. You know that you have to put your business in a way to be able to sell it, to make it more enticing. You should also put your finances in a way to be able to make it more enticing for you so that you get to keep more of your money. Because the goal is not to work that hard, that long, and for Uncle Sam to literally just take the money from me. And so whether it's opportunity zones, whether it is just spreading it out over a handful of years, we want to be mindful and be thinking, all right, if Uncle Sam is waiting for me to sell my business and he did not help me run this business, what are some of the strategies that I can put in place to make sure that he does not mess with me? He does not mess with me. Right. So I do think that is important. We got two left. Scholars. We are moving and grooving. Okay, so we move into our legacy layer, and we talk about how do I make sure that if I'm just a steward of the things that I have, my house, my money, my cars, my business, everything that I have is mine for a time and it's going to be gone. I would like to be able to choose who it goes to. Right? To me, that's the idea of a legacy. Whether you're like, I really want to make sure my kids are set up, wonderful, fantastic. If you're like, I really want to make sure that no, I don't want to leave my kids nothing, right? I hear that too. You're like, that's fine too. But do you want to leave it to Uncle Sam? Because one thing I often will ask people is, if you can control what Uncle Sam spends, what would you like him to spend money on? And more times than not, the things that people list are not things that Uncle Sam is currently spending money on. And if that's the case, then I don't want to give it to Uncle Sam because he's not even going to listen to me. At least if I can structure this in some way that it may be possible for my kids to be able to do something with it, and then they can listen to me, right? And so whether you're sitting here and we're thinking, right, so business owners, we think about passing the business, the value to the next generation. And we look at the legacy layer, we're going to go back to donor advised funds. We already started talking about it a little bit in the bracket game, but we're going to go a little bit deeper, where it's not just bunching where we're just trying to look at what tax bracket we're in. We really want to talk about how do we set this up for our kids, because we know that generational wealth, it says by the second generation, 70% of it is gone. By the third generation, 90% of it is gone, which is crazy numbers. Like, that's crazy work. And so we want to look and see, how do I pass on more than the money? Because it obviously is something more than that. And we know that because people who win the lottery, it says that within 3 years, the majority of them are filing for bankruptcy. That we know that professional athletes, within 3 years of retirement, the majority of them are broke as well. So it must be something more than just the money. That me just giving you the money does not make you wealthy. That it is a mindset, it's an understanding, it's a relationship with money. And I normally will describe the idea of like a bodybuilder. Their relationship with food is it's like fuel for my muscles. And so they eat food that's pretty nasty, right? We're just gonna be honest, right? It doesn't have a lot of flavor in it because they're not eating for enjoyment. That's not the relationship they have with money. They work out for enjoyment. That they're eating the food purposely for fuel. And so as a result, they eat certain macros, certain different ways of eating it. When it comes to money, we're the same way. What is our relationship with money? Are we afraid of money? That when we have it, we're stressed, we have anxiety, we're nervous, we're anxious. We think someone's going to steal it. We think it's going to draw attention to us. That we're worried so much about the money, we're going to lose it. Right? That's one type of relationship with money. Do we worship it? Do we exalt it? Put it as like an idol, where we use the people and we worship the money instead of, or instead of like worshiping the people, right? Obviously not literally worshiping the people, but we help the people and we use the money. Instead, we use the money and we don't, well, we help the money and we use the people. That's another relationship with money. Even in the simplest level, that you have three general relationships. You either spend all that you have, less than what you have, or more than what you have. And a lot of people say, well, if I had more, I would spend less. I have found that to not be the case because that's just not their relationship with money. And so if you are someone that's like, all right, what do I ultimately do? How do I structure this money in a way to make sure that I can kind of pass it along and make sure that we keep the most of it? Then one of the simplest ways is to have a donor advised fund. So you place the money in there, and now all of a sudden you can let your children choose the charities that the money goes to. And the reason that sometimes works is because I have found that there are easy ways to do this and there's complex ways of doing this, and it depends on who you are. That there are private foundations, and we can go through the process of creating a private foundation and putting the documents in the board and all the pieces together. But if you already sort of have a handful of charities that you all are pretty much already thinking of and you want to give to, but you do want to have a little bit of flexibility where the kids can vet some charities as well, a donor advised fund accomplishes that with like a third of the work. And so you could definitely set that up. So a donor advised fund, as we talked about a little earlier, it is a charitable giving account, and then you can set that up. Right? So we have one at Schwab. We have the donor advised funds. That's my custodian that Obsidian Wisdom uses, right? Because again, I don't hold your money, right? So I don't work for Schwab, independent investment advisor, Obsidian Wisdom, but that's where the money is held. They're my custodian, so they hold the money. We can set the fund up for you. You place it in there, and then there's a list of 501c3s. You find the ones that you want, and I have not found one that doesn't exist as far as just in there. And then you can send them you send them some information. They'll send a letter out to that person. If it's the smallest and most discreet nonprofit that no one has heard of, you give them the address, they send it out, they add them into the system, and then you can send the money to them as well. Right, so you're able to do this. The cool thing is you place the money in there. Now the money can be allocated in trades. So now the money can grow. So you've already placed it in there. It's tax-free now because it's inside of the fund. It's going to nonprofits who don't pay taxes. You now can allow that money to continue growing, and it could end up becoming like your own private fund, where you could be like a Rockefeller family, right? You can set it up if you want to. The cool thing is it's a very favorable tax treatment. And then you can show your kids about philanthropy and giving and helping. So you have the contribution, you have the limits, and so you can have your cash deductible, and that's up to 60% of your AGI, your adjusted gross income. And it does have the ability to carry forward 5 years of the excess. So, I mean, if you're just giving a ton of money all the time, then it is what it is. But if you just do a large amount once, and then there's a certain portion that you weren't able to get towards, then you have a 5-year carry forward for the excess. And so you have the appreciated securities, a deductible, and then that is at the fair market value of 30% of AGI, right? That the different income forms have a different way that you can write off the taxes inside of the fund. And so real properties, other assets, they can all be placed in there as well. That if you're like, hey, I want to have this fund, it can be its own name, and then you want to write, just like a business almost, where you want to write the property into the ownership of the fund, and then the fund can access the property and do whatever. Takes the rental income into the fund, and then it can send it out. That you can sort of structure any way that you want to. So you can put any appreciable securities in there. So you have like stocks, mutual funds, ETFs, that you can have all those in there, and that you get to avoid all of the capital gains because, again, it's a non-taxable going to a nonprofit and a 501c3. And then you can sell the securities and the investments and go from there. So people do enjoy that as well. We talked about the legacy planning, where your kids can run this fund. They would either coordinate with me, or if you whoever you would have, that would kind of be the one setting it up. And then the kids can choose their own charities, their own nonprofits, their own endeavors that they would like to donate the money to, and it's already set in there. And so you can create this giving philanthropic legacy for your family because it's already in there, so they can't take it out, right? It can't go to them. It has to go to a nonprofit, and the money is continuing to grow and the assets are continuing to appreciate inside of there. For a lot of people, you end up not having as complex investments. For most people, they just put index funds in there because they're not really putting the money in there to grow. They're putting the money in there to get the tax break today, and then also just to have it kind of structured. They're not sure who they want to give it to. They talked to their CPA. The CPA was like, "Hey, we want to be able to donate $10,000." You're sitting there, and it's the end of the year, and you just don't know who to give it to. But you have to but you have to be able to move it out of your ownership by that deadline. You will put it in a donor advised fund, and then it gives you the time to figure out who to give it to later. Then you can vet out the charities and decide which ones make the most sense for you and your fund. So we talk about a donor advised fund versus a private foundation. They don't require a separate legal entity. They don't have the 5% distribution requirement that a private fund has. You don't have the same form. So I think it's like a form 990 that you file for a private foundation, right? There's no excess tax on the investment income. You don't even really need a staff, right? I mean, it's pretty much just set up. You sort of get it. So for the majority of people that I've come across, donor advised funds ends up being the best approach for them. They don't really need it to be that complex. The minimum contributions, it varies. I've seen some as little as like $50, $100. I've seen some as where it needs to be 1,000 or 5,000. The amount varies, but as far as what you give when you write a check, for most places they won't write a check to your nonprofit unless it's probably at least $50. You'll see it. There's a certain amount. They'll be like, hey, we're not going to write the check for less than this. You can open the fund, start placing the money in there if you want, but you just won't be able to contribute it until you place the rest of it in there, or you allow the money to grow, right? So those would be kind of the choices that you would make with there. All right, I think I do have one. All right, so you see down here, so we have Paul and Nancy, they're 68. So they have $15,000 a year that they give to charity, very similar to our other example where we had $12,000 a year. They have $80K in Apple stocks, basis of $12K. That means that they invested $12,000, and a gain of $68K. That means that that's the money that grew in the account. Because it is a high appreciating account, that is a taxable event for you. So that is normally going to be a sign that's like, hey, maybe that should be the money that we first move into our donor advised fund, because that way I don't have to pay taxes on those capital gains. And then the charity doesn't have to, because they're a charity, they don't pay taxes on it anyways. As a result, you can see that they will sell the stock, donate the cash, pay the $10,000 in capital gains tax, and the charity receives the $69,800, and they donate, or they could donate the stock directly to the donor advised fund, and then they avoid that $10,200 capital gains tax, and then they deduct $80,000 from their income, and then they are able to give out grants of $20,000 a year for 4 years through the donor advised fund. So the charity receives the full $80,000 instead of the difference of you paying taxes on $10,000 and they receive $7,000. And so you save the taxes, the fund gets the additional amount, everybody wins. It's one of those things where it's like, hey, what do you want to do? Right? Most people are like, look, I don't want to think about it. It's a lot. But if you choose between giving $10,000 to the Boys and Girls Club, or someone that you really feel good about, someone you're on the board for, right? Your church, synagogue, mosque, things like that, or giving it to Uncle Sam, what would you choose? What would be your preference? And for a lot of people, they would say, yeah, I think my preference would be for me to be able to give that to the people that I care about. And especially if you have your own a nonprofit, you have maybe your family has one, or just one that you've been a part of for a long time, you can see how it just sets it up where more of your money is going towards the cause that you actually want to support. And in my opinion, that just can't be a bad thing. Can't be a bad thing. All right. So as you know, we close the show with our plan review, where we put all of the little pieces together. So we have a real retirement plan. We'll use real numbers, real feedback. And so tonight we're going to have Sandra, and Sandra's going to be 58 years old. So she's going to be a teacher with $3,400 a month and a monthly pension, no Social Security, and she thinks that the pension will cover everything. And, it mostly does. But there are 3 gaps that are hurting her a little bit, and I'm going to end with that for you. So we'll go through the gaps and we'll see how we would adjust the plan, and we'll see what makes the most sense for Sandra. And then we'll be all done, ladies and gentlemen. So I hope that goes well for you. So as you all know, I normally start with kind of the first same 4 questions, which is, what does she have and where? So that gives me ideas. Is it in pre-tax? Is it after tax? Is it tax-free? Is it in a business? Is it in a home? Or is it in the stock market? Like, what do we have and where? What is our current tax situation? What are the future tax problems based off where we're at? Any other gaps that we see? And then what are the specific fixes? And how much do we save? Right. So let's go through that. So we have Sandra. And we said Sandra is 58, and we said that she is a teacher. Sandra is 58. Sandra is a teacher. So what does she have? All right. And we said that she has $3,400 in a pension. All right, congratulations. That's very nice, Sandra. And that inside of her 403B, she has 180K. Actually, did that one a little bit backwards, and that happens sometimes. In her savings account, she has 45,000. So she has 45,000 in her savings account. Her Social Security and her Roth, she has 0. So we have $0 in our Social Security and our Roth. Right, so that is going to be our starting place. And then our tax bracket is going to be 12%. Yep. And because she is hanging out with me in the good old state of Florida, she does not have a state tax. So there is no state tax for Sandra. So congratulations, my friend. All right, so then that is our starting place. That's where we're starting at. So then normally we'll then talk about, all right, where's the money at? So we know we have the pension, $3,400 a month. We normally would look to see whether the pension has a cost of living adjustment, a COLA. In Florida, the FRS system, if you are before 2012, it is a yes on the COLA. And if you're after 2012, it is a no on the COLA. And for Sandra, she has no COLA. Because she has no COLA, cost of living adjustment, that automatically lets me know that inflation is going to be a that I at least would be wanting to look at. Because for most people, I find that we're either going to be talking about volatility, where you're just super aggressive, inflation, where it's a little bit too safe. It could be healthcare, where we're just exposed. We don't really have anything kind of set aside to help us pay for our healthcare expenses. If we're dependent too much on Social Security, and then you have things like longevity. What if I just live longer than I thought? Like, everybody is talking about starting this early, living like there's no tomorrow. But what if I'm just hanging out at 100 years old? Like, what does that look like for my retirement plan? And so you normally have these different things that we are looking at. And there's a couple of different ones, but for sure inflation is big for her, because if you're not keeping up with inflation where you have a pension and you don't have a cost of living adjustment, and basically, right, so the rule of 72 is basically every 18 to 20 years, your purchasing power cuts in half, which means that if you could have lived in your retirement lifestyle with $50,000, then in 20 years, you would need $100,000 to live the exact same lifestyle because of the cost of everything going up. And you and I would be like, wow. And I'm like, I know. So we do want to keep that in mind, that if you remember when gas was $1 or something like that, like I remember as a kid in the 90s, gas was $1.99. I remember seeing that. My dad told the story when he was a kid, he can go to the corner store and get a pack of cookies and a soda for a nickel. And we're now talking about getting rid of the penny because it's too expensive to make because of inflation. And you can't buy nothing for a penny anyways because of inflation. So then we'll normally be thinking about that. So then gap number one, if we are 58 and retiring, we can't do Medicare until 65. So if you can't touch Medicare until 65, that means that we have 7 years that we need to cover with healthcare expenses. And healthcare typically is, I believe it ends up being roughly around like $1,200 a month. So basically like $1,000 a month. And that means that you'll be close to $100K over those 7 years that you would need to have set aside. That could be up to $100,000. That's a pretty big concern. We also talked about gap number two, which would be inflation. That if I have a pension and I'm having $3,400 and that's fixed and it doesn't change every single month, then that means all right, so we're 58, so that'll be like 78. So we'll basically say in 20 years, that means that while I was able to have $3,400 a month, it's really like I'm only receiving $1,700 a month because of inflation. And if you think about that, think about the mortgage payment, that what it used to be, right? You used to be able to get a house for $500 a month, like 30 years ago, 40 years ago. You get a house for $1,000 a month, maybe 20 years ago. Maybe 10 years ago, you get a house for $1,500 a month. And now the house is like $2,000 a month. That you can have a car payment for $250 a month. And then it was $350. And then it was $450. And now it's so high that they're talking about adding a couple years onto your car payment, so that way it's not $900 for a car payment. They're talking about going from a 30-year mortgage to a 50-year mortgage, so that way it's not a $3,000 a month car payment. So inflation is a real thing. And so the cost of everything goes up. And if your income doesn't go up, you won't be able to afford your lifestyle at all, right? At all. The third thing that we'll normally think about that is just unique to pension. So gap number 3 is going to be the benefits selection. If you are married, then you may have to choose a different benefit. It depends on how well the plan is structured, right? There are different ways to be able to do it. But if you have no other kind of options already set aside, then the number one thing that we're going to do is have what's called the sweetheart option. So when it comes to pension, you can either choose a single life, which is the person who has it. You can choose a period certain, which is sort of as it sounds. It just means that we're going to pay this amount out to someone for a specific number of years. And because of the period certain, it will change how much you're to receive. So let's say if you chose the single life only, you're taking on some of the risk, right? If you pass, no one else gets any money. And so you get the most there. If you share the risk with the insurance company, which is who's administering the pension, and you choose a period certain, they might say, all right, we'll drop it to $3,500 a month if you want like a 10-year certain or something like that. And then you have the joint life, which is you and your spouse. And you could do, you could do like you and one of your kids if you want to do a generational wealth play. But for the most part, it's going to be you and your spouse. And because it's both of your lives, the amount will maybe be $3,000 a month, right? It's going to be a lower amount. So you get the most if you have the single life, you get the least if you have the joint life. But that is something that's very important to decide, because if you don't have any other option, so let's say we met and you're like, oh, well, Dre, we have $1 million in life insurance. And so if something happens to me, the spouse would get $1 million. But okay, well, if that's the case, then choose the single life, because you then give yourself, like, if nothing happens to you, you have an extra $1,000 every single month that you are going to give up that you get to keep. And then so nothing happens to you, you have an extra $12,000 every year, and it becomes rainbows and skittles if you live for a long time. If something was to happen to you unexpectedly and you passed early, we have the life insurance policy. So the person is then able to take that money and then invest it in something and generate the income that they would have been missing from you on their own. If you didn't have enough time to be able to put that type of a plan in place, then you normally would just choose the joint life, because you want to make sure that your spouse is covered, that they have the income. Oh man, accidentally closed that. I can reopen it because we're almost anyways. But yes, you want to, if you don't have any other options that are set aside, we choose the joint life. And a lot of the times, most states will require your spouse to sign off if you choose a single, where it's like, hey, do you know your spouse is trying to not choose the joint life? You are married. Are you okay with that? So they do have to sign off anyway. So don't be trying to be sneaky with them. But if you do have the steps, you do have the plan in place, it gives you that opportunity to just have a little bit more flexibility, where you don't have to leave that extra money on the table, where it's like, I'm not going to leave that extra $1,000. I'm just going to enjoy myself. All right. And so I will bring that back up on the board and boom, add to the stage. And there it is, right? See, it's like nothing ever happened. Oh, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. All right, so the wrong choice, get your spouse nothing. We don't want to be able to do that. So we've identified the gap. So then we move on. And it's like, all right, well, what do you do to fix the problems? And so for gap number one, we're talking about the healthcare bridge. Then we would say, hey, let's go look at the Affordable Care Act. Let's go look at the exchange. And then we would do strategic withdrawals from that 403B as far as your living expenses. So that way you can qualify for the lower income and have those premium subsidies. So you don't have to pay as much for those healthcare over those 7 years, because it's income, it's like needs based. So if you end up taking a whole bunch of money out, they're gonna be like, well, you have a whole bunch of money, so you don't need anything. If you take out less money, you're very strategic, you give yourself the ability to have more. So then boom, we cover the healthcare. Gap number two, we have the inflation risk. And so we can do some conversions of our 403B, and then we would do that we'll do the Roth conversions within that 12% window, right? So we're in that window. It's only 12% right now. And so we could do that from 58 to 65. So that could be their Roth conversion windows. So we were able to say, all right, I'm 58. I don't have Social Security yet. And as a result, I have my lowest income earning years. I'll be able to wait this out, do my Roth conversion 12%, build a dividend income stream off of that. And so now you have additional income that's tax-free in retirement. And then because it's a dividend invested in the market, I'm no longer worried about inflation, because businesses have the ability to keep up with inflation. Why is that? Because they raise their prices. Same with real estate. They have the ability to keep up with inflation. Why is that? Because they raise their prices. If there is someone that is able to raise their prices, then that means that inflation is always going to be accounted in the value of the company, because they are selling at a higher price. So their value is going up, and it basically has inflation baked into the cake. And then for gap number three, for this particular option, they did not have the other strategies available I talked about, so they chose the joint life policy, and then that reduced the amount that they would end up receiving. It was naturally worth it, because you don't want to risk everything, right? You want to gamble a little bit, but you don't want to gamble everything. And because we didn't have any other options available, that made the absolute most sense for them. So we're able to set that up, and now we're able to say, all right, I got my plan 58 to 65. Everything is looking good. Man, we went through it. Of course we did, scholars. It's always a good time. So we have all 9 of the segments. We went through the income blueprint, the conversion window, the RMD playbook, Social Security Advantage, Medicare meter, the bracket game, owner's exit, legacy layer, and then the final plan review. And as a result, we're able to kind of cut through a lot of the noise. And you can see how having a plan in place, taking the steps ahead of time, how it's very beneficial for you. If you are someone that's like, man, what would be the absolute first step that I would do? And I'm like, man, I'm glad that you asked. The first step that you would do, you would go to obsidianwisdom.com/assessment. And I put together a tax smart retirement stage assessment. It takes you less than 5 minutes. It'll tell you which of the 7 stages that you are in. So that way you are aware of which opportunities are opening for you when it comes to tax planning, keeping more of your money. Whether you're in stage 1 in the build phase or stage 7 in the transfer phase, there are moves that are on the board and you don't want to miss the windows. It's absolutely free. And you can go to obsidianwisdom.com/assessment and you will be able to do the test. You'll find out what stage you're on, and then it will actually give you the workbook, which is phenomenal. And in that workbook, it is going to go through each of the strategies that you would use. It'll give you the next 5 things that you should do based on your stage. And then it will also, after that, tell you what you should do from that point forward if you're in the previous stage, and then what you would have done to move from that stage into your future stage. And I think I probably can. Let me see if I probably can find it for you just real quick. Let me see if I can find it. I think I can. Just give me one second. And then after that, I'll let you go because it's been long. My throat is dry, and we'll do all that. All right. So here it is. You can see it's a beautiful workbook. Easily could charge for it. It is absolutely yours for free. Goes through each of the 7 stages. It tells you exactly what you'll be doing in each of those stages, what strategies make the most sense for you, the do's and the don'ts, how you move on to the next one. And then as you move into the next stage, it then tells you what that looks like as well. And then you're able to really put together a plan and just kind of make sure you don't miss any opportunity. Filled with examples, definitely spend a lot of time on that. And it goes through all of the things that I saw dealing with pre-retirees, business owners, and those already retired. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. As always, I'm Drake Griggs, founder of Obsidian Wisdom Certified Financial Planner, where we love the idea of wisdom equals freedom and helping you have a little bit more wisdom and a little less worry. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy life.